Hi, I'm Hal. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the books that I ended up reading in March, and I ended up reading a total of 8 books again. I'm probably going to put in the little graph of my reading from Storygraph because I was doing some insane readings on some days, which is kind of in a very similar vein to last month. I had to read like 80 pages or so a day of one of the books so that I could read it in time before the loan was due back. And then I also read another 2 Rachel Reid books, which always kind of ups my reading because I fly through those really quickly. Stats wise, I read 2 physical books, 4 ebooks, and then 2 audiobooks as well. I got 2 of those books physically from my library, and the other 4 were all things that I got via Libby. So yeah, the first book that I ended up finishing this month was Reclaimed by Seth Haddon. This is the 3rd book of these gay fantasy romance books that are set in the same world, so it's kind of following on from the world and the setup and stuff that was set up in Reforged and Reborn. In this one, we're once again in a different part of this world. We're in a city called Byrongrad, which is part of a bigger kind of country. I can't remember the name of it. And in this place, it's a bit more democratic. You get these councils of the highest level in their field. So you as a sage, you can become the top, in this level of top sages, they all wear these masks. Similarly, the guard, you get people who wear these masks who are the highest level of the guard, and you get councils based off of these sages and stuff like that. So yeah, we're following our main character, Saba Vasily, who is a sage. He's researching. What he's been trying to do is research into a way of opening a portal into the astral sea, which is an idea that was kind of explored more in the previous book in Reborn, which is this he sees it as this realm of possibilities, trying to kind of open up a portal in there. And when we start this book, Saba has been imprisoned because a portal has been opened up into the astral sea, but in the process of opening up this portal, which is much bigger than kind of what his workings were going to do, it has also wiped out an entire kind of quarter of this city, killing obviously all the people in there, as well as a Resman Lord. They care less about the people who were living there because they are a population of immigrant, refugee people from a place that was previously colonized by the Resman Empire, which it's an ethnic group that Saba himself is a part of. So yeah, that's where we find Saba in the worst situation of his life. And then we also meet our other main character in this book, who is Zek, who is a character that we met briefly in Reborn. He is the Reswin ambassador, so he has come here to kind of investigate what's going on. He ends up helping to get Saba out of prison so that they can investigate kind of what's going on together, whilst he still obviously has kind of a realm of authority over him as a potential suspect. But he's very much I don't think that he's at fault. I think there's something else going on here, which is the case. So we kind of follow their investigation as things unfold, and we get more of the political machinations that are going on in this book. One of the things that is, I think, different about this book than the other 2 is that we only get Saba's point of view in this book, which, when we learn more about what's going on, makes sense. But I would have loved to have Zek's perspective, because I found him a really fun character to have in this book, and also because Saba's point of view, there's a lot of, self-worth issues, a lot of, mental healthy self-hatred stuff going on, and it's a bit of a downer to have the entire time. I think it would have been fun to break it up with another point of view in there. Saba is is trans in this world. He's kind of had access to this like magical HRT substance, and he's had top surgery, but part of his investigation into the astral sea is because he wants to be able to change his body to like a cis man's body, and that's a lot of his motivation kind of in this book. And then we get the fallout of kind of the idea and stuff like that. I do think, and this is like maybe a minor issue, I do enjoy the like transness that has been portrayed both with Saba and previously kind of within this world, which is more of that like there is a substance that you can take which is very much analogous to HRT, and you can have surgeries like top surgery. I don't think that they're doing phalloplasty in this world, because it does feel kind of more of that like medieval fantasy world setting, which like I do enjoy. I think it's a better middle ground than like, you know, magic or science in this world that like trans people can basically transition and be indistinguishable from cis people, or like there is no option for trans people to transition. Both things that I have read in like sci-fi fantasy books, I need to point out. I'm not pulling these out of nowhere, but I felt it really odd that the fantasy HRT that Saba is on does not have bottom growth associated with it. And I'm like, if we're pulling, like, it does everything else that like testosterone would do to like a body that was assigned female at birth, but not bottom growth. And I'm like, I feel like a lot of issues in this book would have been maybe like lower down on the issue chart if Saba had had bottom growth. I don't think it would have fixed, but I think he would have been in a happier state. And it's yeah, odd is what I will say. I do feel like the plot in this book was much more competent than the previous two books. In the previous two books I have complained a little bit about how big the plot was for how short the book was, because they were both coups on the reigning king or emperor type plots, whereas this is more of a like crime investigation, right? It's much more doable in the space of like a silly romance novel. So I felt like that was good. I felt much more like this plot was much more kind of understandable and doable in the space that we had. We do still have some political machinations that are going on in this book, but again, I felt like they were more doable within the time space rather than fixing the political system or whatever, you know? I think the setup for the romance was really good. I really enjoyed Luan Zek as a character. It is a bit of a like big strong guy and like smaller, more like waifish guy thing going on. I was reading this because it's an audiobook. I probably started this around the same time that I was also reading Tough Guy, so I was comparing the two. But the thing is that Luan Zek is explicitly described as a bear, and so he is so much hotter, and that does like make this better. I don't think it was my favourite, but I definitely enjoyed it. So like I do feel like Reborn is still my favourite of the three that I've read. But I did still really enjoy this one. I think I did end up enjoying this one a bit more for the plot, because again, like I mentioned, I felt like the point of view narration was a bit overwrought and a bit like, you gotta get out of this headspace, my guy. Overall, I did give this 4 stars. I felt like this was better than some of the 3-star romances that I had been reading, but I don't think it's quite at the same level as Reborn in terms of like having a good fun time about it. The next book that I ended up finishing was Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. This is the book that I was having to read like 86 pages of a day to finish it in time, because this book is over 1,000 pages. So this is like, in the author bio section is described as like a historical fantasy book, which I think is the best kind of descriptor for it. I definitely wouldn't call it like a romantasy book. I would maybe call it more of a like political like intrigue fantasy kind of type, a political fantasy book. We are in a like medieval Renaissance type Europe. There's a couple of places that seem to be in like earlier time periods in terms of like the myth, like the history that Jacqueline Carey is picking up on. We have some places that are like a bit more like Viking tribe-y, the England, you know, the Great Britain situation is very Celtic tribe-y, again, kind of that pre-Roman almost vibe. So it's not like a specific time period, but we're definitely playing with historical kind of elements to this fantasy world. We are very much in a like Western Europe type world. The map looks very Western Europe, and we're following our main character Phaedra, who is quite early on is abandoned by her parents and is raised. She's in Terre d'Ange, which is like the France equivalent in this world. Though I will explain more about some of the world building in a second. She's raised by something called the Night Court, which is this kind of series of houses that exist in this world, in this country at least. And from there, she's being trained to be, I think, in the service of Nama from the beginning, which is like a courtesan type role. And she ends up being adopted by a guy called Delaunay, who kind of continues her courtesan training, but is also training her and another guy to kind of act like spies. He's very involved in a lot of political machinations, and he's like, I now have these two young people that I can add to my service to kind of find out more information for me to continue doing my political machinations. This, yeah, like I mentioned, it's a 1,000 page fantasy novel that was originally published in like 2001, so there's very much a vibe to it. And a vibe that I really enjoyed. I felt like the writing in this was like beautiful. It's very flowery writing. One of the things that's going on is that Phaedra has this like red dot in her eye, which means that she's marked by one of the like gods in this world, by Kushiel. But the entire way through this book it's described as like a scarlet mote in her eye kind of thing. So we're in like that type of fantasy, which again I feel is very reminiscent of the like early 2000s kind of fantasy books. So yeah, why did I pick up this book is a really funny question. Back in 2020, I ended up getting really into the Untamed at that point in time, which obviously led to me reading other things as well. But as part of my, very specific interest in the Untamed, I was also reading a lot of fan fiction as well. And so at some point in that period, between, 2020 and maybe like 2022 or so, I picked up a fanfic that has not, the setting of which has not left my brain since. And the setting of said fanfic was the world of Kushiel's Dart, and so when I saw that it was in my library, I was like, oh, I'll pick this up. And the reason that I feel like it has stuck out to me is because there was this insane ritualized BDSM setup in this world, which is also true for this book as well. And I think it's crazy. The world building in this book is that what if there was like a Jesus type kind of character? And then as Jesus is dying on the cross, what is his blood, the tears of Mary Magdalene, who is crying because he's dying on the cross, the earth where they interact, created a new guy. And he's like, again, this like magical, like religious like figure called Elua. And he goes round and has all of these companions, and they end up settling in Terre d'Ange, which is, I think, why also the place is called that. Don't quote me. And basically, from there, you have this, like, religious, like, country set up, where all of these people, like, can follow and worship these various companions, which are involved in all of these, like, houses and things like that. And one of these people is Kushiel, who is a, like, forgiveness through, like, masochism type figure. Again, I can't explain this properly because I was just, like, in it so well. So yeah, Phaedra has this mark on her eye that means she's something called Kushiel's Dart, which basically means that she's God's perfect little masochist. And that's, part of, like, her plot in this book is that she's being used by Delaunay as this, like, spy kind of figure, and you know, being given to various clients who have these like, you know, in the world kind of ritualized BDSM kind of setups, and in a way to kind of gain their trust so that she can get more information for Delaunay and stuff like that. Crazy setup. All of this was explained to us in like chapter 2 in like a really long like lore dump situation, which I've got to admit was not great. And I did skim through a lot of it, but I do think it's fascinating. I think it's really cool. The plot of this book is obviously, as I mentioned, we kind of follow Phaedra from a very young girl to her growing up within this system, and then kind of something really big and major happens and she kind of has to strike out on her own. We get more of the political stuff, you know, forces trying to attack and kind of get control of the, you know, the city, the country that she's grown up in, and the like political powers in there. And she kind of has to strike out alongside Jocelyn, who is basically like her god. He's a guy, he's in one of the other houses, a guy called Kushiel's, and they're this like religious order of monks. They're meant to be like celibate and like warrior monks and stuff like that. He is the love interest in this book. He does not get introduced until 30% of the way through this book, and it's great. I really, really enjoyed their relationship. I felt like it was done very, again, with the time span that we have of this book, it was done very naturally. They start off quite standoffish. Obviously, Jocelyn is not very impressed with the type of work that Phaedra does. That is an outlier. Everyone else, you know, it's not very, like... This book doesn't, like, shame Phaedra for the type of work that she is doing. And then they end up getting in these situations where they have to, like, stick together because they're the only two people that can help each other. And they keep on putting themselves in these situations where they're, like, standing in front of the other guy in front of a gun kind of situations. They're like, I will do anything in my power to make sure that you're safe. And I don't care if that makes you hate me. I don't care if that gets me injured or, like, in danger. I'm going to, like, you know, physically, metaphorically put myself in front of you to keep you safe. And this is both of them doing it kind of with each other, kind of throughout the like middle to back end of this book. And it's great. Like, yeah, I do believe that they're going to like fall in love about this. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was done really well. I also like that they're not like perfectly suited for each other, right? Like, Jocelyn goes through a lot in this book, which changes like who he is and the stuff that he believes in and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he's never going to be like a person who wants to cause Phaedra harm, even in like a sexual like BDSM setup. And Phaedra is always going to be a person who like does actually need that from a partner in some situations. And I think that the fact that there's like friction there is actually really interesting, and I think it's going to make for some interesting things with the other books in this series. There are other people that Phaedra like has weird attachments with as well, which I think is really interesting. I think another thing that worked really well for me in this book is that because it's so long, you really get time to form emotional attachments to the world and the other characters in this book. When bad things happen to our characters, I felt really emotional about it. I you know, teared up at various parts of this book, and I think that that was really well done. I also really like that we're getting that big, like, fantasy, like, war plot, but we're following, like, a courtesan who's trying to do politics around this, like, war situation, and I think that was also really interesting. I really enjoyed this book. My main kind of criticisms, apart from obviously what I mentioned that the beginning of this book is quite info-dumpy in a way that made me lose interest and skim read those sections of the book, is that, like I mentioned, there's that Jesus-like figure, and then obviously the guy after him. We do also get like a religious order following the like Jesus-like figure in this book, and they're very much, and I mean very explicitly, based on Jewish people, which I don't think that's done poorly. I just think it's questionable to make your religious order that follows a Jesus-like figure Jewish. I don't think this was done with malice. I think it's part of the thing of it's written in 2001. But it was a very, like, it made me pause in a real way. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I don't think this is a book to really describe as romantasy. I think that you're not going to get the things that you get in, like, modern romantasy books from this book. And with that, I do say, like, as much as there is, like, obviously, like, sex scenes and BDSM stuff going on in this book, I don't think it's written in a super eroticized way in the same way that some of the other books that I read are. I really, really enjoyed this. I gave this 5 stars. I'm super excited to see what happens next in this story. It's definitely something that I want to pick up and continue. The next book that I ended up reading was Guardian Chenhun Volume 1 by Priest. This is difficult to describe. This is originally a, Chinese BL or Danmei novel that has more recently been translated into English. And it's like a contemporary supernatural crime gay romance book. I do feel like a lot of Danmei novels are kind of out there. If they're not wuxia xianjia novels, they're doing something crazy. So yeah, back to me in 2020 being obsessed with The Untamed. I then went, and because The Untamed was based on, again, a Danmei novel called The Grandmaster Demonic Cultivation, which is the name of some of the other adaptations of the story, I then read that. I read the other works by the same author, MXTX. I obviously watched The Untamed. I also watched some other of the, like, big gay Chinese dramas. So I watched Guardian, which had been released in 2018, which is the adaptation of this story, as well as Word of Honor, which was releasing around the time that I was really into this, which is based on another volume by Priest. So yeah, at the time, there weren't English translations of this novel. There weren't official English translations of this novel. If you wanted to read any of the books that any of these properties were based on, you were working off fan translations on either, like, websites, or you had to find the, like, Google Drive, which had the Google Doc translation in it. And so the quality of the, like, I think the quality of the translation was probably, like, pretty average throughout all of these. The quality of the way that it was presented to you was very, like, different depending on where you were finding it. So, I had a really good time with my Heaven's Official Blessing translation. The, like, Grandmaster Demonic Cultivation translation was a bad experience. At the time, I'd obviously watched Guardian. I'd really enjoyed it. I knew that the novel was very different from the show, and I just, like, wasn't super interested in finding it and checking it out at the time. And I was like, it's going to be so much effort. And it wouldn't have actually been that hard, because I recently searched, like, Guardian Priest into Google and very quickly found a card that had a link to a Google Drive. So, like, I could have definitely done it, but I wasn't interested in it at the time. And since then, they have, I think, Seven Seas Publishing have been producing these, like, legally, professionally translated books, which are done very nicely. They all have art in them. However, I was, in the time that has passed, I'm no longer, like, actively, obsessed with these works, and I'm also not buying, like, 11 books for Heaven Official's Blessing, which I understand why that is the case. That book is as long as the Bible. I'm just not doing that. But when I saw that one of the libraries that I have access to on Libby had access to Guardian, at least the first volume, I was like, I'll check this out. It is very different from the show. Obviously, some of that is I was expecting, because with these shows, when they get produced, because of the censorship around gay relationships in Chinese media, that's often very toned down. What I wasn't expecting is that for the book to be, like I mentioned, urban, kind of contemporary, like, supernatural stuff, where all of the ghosts and, like, the supernatural forces that we're dealing with are much more based on, like, Confucian, Buddhist kind of that Chinese kind of mythology, religion, law, where you have like the mortal realm and like the heavenly realm and like the like netherworld kind of thing, and like I mentioned, ghosts and like ideas around reincarnation and stuff like that. But in the show, it's like a sci-fi, like, you know, situation. We're on like planets, there's different races of aliens. Crazy. I don't know why they changed that. Insane. Anyway, so in this book, we're following our main character, Zhao Junlan, who is like he's the chief of the SID, which is the Special Investigations Department. So, like a police officer, but they specifically investigate all of the supernatural crimes. So if they think that it's involved with the supernatural, that's what they're looking into. And through a series of circumstances, there is obviously a crime that they are investigating, and Zhao Julan ends up meeting Shen Wei, who is a professor at the local university. They're in a place called like Dragon City. It's very like in the same way as Austen novels. Anytime a specific like address is mentioned, it's just like XXXXX, you know? So yeah, meets Shen Wei and they form this like weird relationship, and he ends up kind of keeps on cropping up as they, you know, solve. Obviously they kind of need his help for the first case, and then there's another kind of case, and Shen Wei also appears at that case kind of thing. So yeah, that's the romantic relationship that we're kind of building towards, is Zhao Julan and Shen Wei. So yeah, I thought that this was really fun. It is like, I do think a lot of my enjoyment of this book was the fact that I have already seen this story adapted, even though, like I mentioned, very different things going on in the adaptation. So like, obviously the like, you know, the beats in this book, I remember them happening on the TV show as well. It did follow very similar beats in that kind of way. I also like, I enjoyed these characters. I think they are fun. It is, I don't know if this is like an aspect of like the original book in Chinese, or if this is like an adaptation thing. It was wild to read because it read very like straightforwardly for a lot of this book. And then every so often, next to like very like normal middle of the road type English for a book, there would be very like specific slang thrown in, and it was just a crazy tone, and it wasn't all of the time, but it happened enough that like you picked up on it. I mean, the first time it happened, you picked up on it because it was such a difference in tone kind of going on. Yeah, I had a fun time. I don't think I would have enjoyed this as much if like I didn't know where this plot was going, if I didn't know what was going on with this relationship and kind of why these people are acting the way that they're acting. But like, I have that knowledge, so I had a good time. So yeah, I ended up giving this 3 stars. I am definitely interested in checking out the rest of the books in this, the volumes that make up this book, if I have access to those via my library. I think Guardian split up to 3 volumes, which again makes it very much more reasonable of a thing to read. It was good. Crazy. In a real way, I was so close to getting back into this show, apart from the fact that the like subtitles don't work on YouTube. Anyway. The next book that I picked up was The Summer War by Naomi Novik, which is one of the physical books that I read this book. It's a little fantasy novella with set in the same world as like Spinning Silver and Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which in reality just means that there are fairies and fae in this world. We are dealing with a very different set of them, but yeah, they're the like mean, capricious type fairies. Love that. So in this case, we're dealing with the Summerlings, who are like a summer kind of type fae, and there has been an ongoing like 100-year-old war between the Summerlings and the humans. Kind of during the months of summer, when it gets to autumn, they all retreat to their kingdom kind of thing, and there has kind of in recent memory a truce has been formed, but it is still quite tenuous. And in this book, we follow Celia, who accidentally curses her older brother because her older brother's kind of a knight. He wants to leave home for various reasons, and she curses him to like go on these grand adventures but never be able to fall in love. And that, you know, also kind of proves that Celia has magical abilities. And so, like, she ends up being involved, like, as a pawn in some political machinations, and she and her middle brother, who, like, wasn't really well liked by either her older brother or by her, end up trying to work together to find out a way to get, like, find their older brother and uncurse him, kind of thing. And obviously things get kind of wildly more complicated from there. I really enjoyed this. Obviously it's very short. It's about 130 pages, but I think it did a really good job in the time that it had. This was very much about sibling relationships in that way, and, like, I felt like that was done really well. I really enjoyed all the relationships between these siblings. I felt like they felt very realistic. I liked that there were obviously children who were more or less liked by, you know, their father, or even, like, these odd relationships where, like, Celia really looked up to her older brother but didn't care about her middle brother until she had to, and then they, you know, are able to forge this relationship. It's also about, like, the stories that we tell and fae bargains and stuff like that. And yeah, Naomi Novik, I think, can do no wrong in my mind in a real way, and this was, like, another example of her just doing a fantastic job with the story. It got to me emotionally. Again, even though it was only like 130 pages, I had a really good time with this. I ended up giving this 4 stars. The next 2 books that I'm going to talk about are the last 2 Game Changers books that I had to read. So the first one of those was Common Goal by Reid, just the 4th book in the Game Changers series. In this one, they're contemporary hockey romances. In this one, we're following Kyle Swift and Eric Bennett. Kyle is one of Kip's friends. If you've watched season 1 of Heated Rivalry, he is in that. He works at the Kingfisher, which is the, like, gay bar that Kip works at for a period of time, I think, in the book series, and also, like, Kip and his friends hang out at, including Kyle, because obviously he's involved in it. And then also Eric Bennett, he is the goaltender for the New York Admirals. He is one of Scott's friends, and he's kind of older. He has recently separated and divorced from his wife quite amicably. He is bisexual, and he's, like, interested in, like, exploring that a little bit more now that he's no longer, like, in this long-term relationship that he has previously been with a woman. And so, like, him and Eric and Kyle know each other on account of Eric is friends with Scott, who obviously comes and hangs out at the Kingfisher, and Kyle is friends with Kip and works at the Kingfisher. So they've been in each other's circles, and they kind of form this friendship, and Kyle basically offers to, like, be Eric's entry into, like, the gay dating scene kind of thing. And so they start hanging out outside of that. Kyle is also suffering with a little bit of, like, an unrequited crush towards Kip, where he's very much been like, oh, like, Kip is now, you know, is now out with his boyfriend, and so I have to get over this. And so between those two kind of things going on, they end up forming this, like, friends with benefits. Like, Kyle is going to teach Eric how to have, like, gay sex kind of relationship. Kind of everything kind of goes from there. There is an age gap going on in this story. Eric is 41 and Kyle is, like, 25. So, like, that is one of the main, like, cruxes of the relationship, both in terms of, like, I thought it was fun and I had a good time with it, but I think it turns a lot of people off, and also, like, that is the main source of conflict within this book, which was obvious from, like, day one kind of thing, but I still, like, had a good time with. I think part of the reason that I really enjoyed this book is that I really liked Eric Bennett as a character. He is another one of those characters which I think could be read as autistic, but could also be read as demisexual, which I was just like, yes, give him to me. He's my little squishy man now. I think he's really fun, and that meant that, like, whilst there was, like with the other books in this series, a lot of sex in this book, there was also quite a bit of yearning in this book, like, because of how I was reading Eric and kind of some of the things that were said. He's had feelings for Kyle from, like, the beginning of this book. This isn't something that develops kind of over time, which I just thought was really fun and made this, like, really compelling as a relationship. I think Rachel Reid does a good job of, like, proving how well they work together as a relationship. Obviously, Eric is kind of in his last year of, like, doing hockey, so we also get some of his outside interests, which are more along the lines of, like, photography and artwork. And Kyle, as much as, like, he enjoys doing the bar work that he does and hospitality is also studying like classics and things like that. And so we get them like interacting on this like more interest kind of outside of hockey type thing. And yeah, I just thought that they worked really well. I really enjoyed this book. Like I mentioned, the conflict was very obvious from the beginning of this book, but I still had a good time. It still got me emotionally in a real way. So yeah, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I think like overall with all of these books, I'm never really gonna give them any of them 5 stars, but like I had a really good time. I really enjoyed this one. And then following on from that, I also ended up reading Role Model, also by Rachel Reid, which is the 5th book, and it was the last one that I had to read to finish what's currently out of the Game Changers series. In this one, we're following Troy Barrett and Harris Drover. Harris is the social media guy for the Ottawa Centres. He's having a very chill time in this book, I have to point out. Harris is like out as gay, he's doing social media. The only real conflicts that are going on in his life is like his parents are a little bit overprotective for reasons that we discover, and like he's having this hot and cold flirtation thing with Troy Barrett. Whereas like Troy Barrett is in a sore trap kind of his own making. He is the saddest, most pathetic, wet cat of a man that has appeared in this series, you know? He was on the Toronto Guardians team basically in a very short period of time. His secret gay actor boyfriend dumps him, only to very soon afterwards come out of the closet and announce that he's engaged to a different guy. He finds out that his best friend and teammate is a rapist and calls him out for that information, and then gets traded to Ottawa in a very much revenge type thing, because the Ottawa Centres are the worst team in the league, even if they now have like Ilya Rozanov on their team. And so he has to like deal with all of that and also like work with Harris in an attempt to make, you know, improve his social media image, because a lot of people hate him for like presumably like being a traitor and like, you know, backing up these alleged accusations against like one of the like NHL superstars kind of thing. And so like he's just having to deal with like 5 million different problems and also like reassess who he is and maybe like realize that he's can be a nice person. And it's crazy. The disparity between these two plots, crazy. This book takes place like within the timeline of the long game as well, which I thought was really fun. It's really interesting to see I obviously knew some of the beats that were going to happen in this story, but seeing it from obviously the like different perspective of the actual book that they're taking part in, that was really fun. I enjoyed Troy and Ilya's little like friendship that they develop. I thought it was done really well in that, you know, obviously I read them like technically out of order. I've read The Long Game before I read Role Model, but I think with both of them, it's not like you're getting the same events repeated word for word. I think you do get variation. You don't get all of the conversation in both books, which I think is a really smart move. I really enjoy a character who like is like within a system or, you know, has made choices and then they realize that those are like bad actually. I especially do enjoy this when it's like a religious institution or like a system thing, and then they have to like reassess who they are outside of that, you know, thing and try and be a better person. So like I knew what the idea, the conceit of this book was, so I was really excited to read it because I was like, I think I'm gonna have a good time with the Troy book, because like also again, I'd already read The Long Game. I knew who these characters were. I was like, I'm excited for this. I think this is going to be fun. And I did have a fun time. It felt like this really lived up to expectations. And yeah, I just thought it was really fun. Again, with like other books, there's a couple of things in this where I was just a bit like, I don't love how you're describing this person's body. But overall, I did have a fun time with this. I thought that this was really fun. And I was correct in that I would enjoy Troy Barrett. I think the Ottawa Centres are so fun. And we learn that their mascot's a beaver in this book, which I just think is the right amount of like unhinged mascot to team name combination, which I think is great. So yeah, I ended up giving this 4 stars as well. The next book that I ended up picking up was Holy Wrath by Victoria Mier. This is a fantasy book. It's quite expansive, where like we're following a main character, Ophelia, who's in this like city kind of religious state almost, and kind of outside to this is all like barren wasteland with like monsters, but also these like heretics who like are attacking them at various points and things like that. She is like waiting for her like magical / religious powers to appear. She's working as a healer within this like city. She feels quite like ostracized from this society and community because she was like an orphan, and she's also disabled. One of her legs is crippled and she walks with a limp. She's in, again, one of those awful situations prior to the beginning of this book where she got like, it's quite a misogynistic society. One of the like more influential men tried to like force himself on her, and to escape this and the like retribution that caused, because then they were blaming her for, they were trying to call her a witch and things like that. Is the easiest way to explain it. She ends up in like an arranged marriage with one of her friends, but that's also a bit of a complicated situation. This book kind of starts with her being tasked to heal and look after one of the like heretical forces, like strongest warriors. She's tasked with trying to convince her to like join and convert to their religion, and this would like give her those magical abilities that she's looking after, give her the favour of their god, basically. And what actually happens is that this warrior, Niatrix, is a hot butch, like, knight, and she starts introducing doubts to Ophelia about the society that she lives in and the religious kind of order and kind of religion in general. And Ophelia also, throughout this whole thing, has been desperately trying to pretend that she's not a lesbian, and that kind of doesn't really work in regards to Niatrix as well. So things kind of get a lot more complicated and expansive from there. The thing about this book is like there's nothing objectively wrong with it. I thought that the writing was pretty well done. There are a couple of like ideas that we do keep on returning to over and over again, kind of in like a motif kind of way. It's a little bit overwrought, but like I think it's done on purpose. It's fine. I quite liked the relationship. I thought that was done pretty well. I like the like progression of it. It is, again, a little bit more like very early sexual attraction type thing, but again, I think it was done pretty well. I like that these two women very much like respected and trusted the other kind of over the course of the book. I like the religion aspect to this. It was very much, you could tell that it was based on like Catholicism and Christianity, but with like the horror elements kind of dialed up to a 20, and a lot of that extravagance and like historical kind of bent to a lot of things. You have these like holy kind of people, and they're all wearing like chatelaines and stuff like that. I thought that was really cool and interesting. As I've mentioned before, I like these kind of plots where the main character is kind of breaking out of a like idea that they've been given by society, and then they find out that it's wrong and they need to like reassess who they are. My main issue with this book, I read this as an audiobook and I did not like the audiobook narrator for this, and I don't mean that in that I didn't like her. She was putting on a voice for Ophelia. This book is in third person perspective, but we're getting Ophelia's perspective the entire time through this book. And so the audiobook narrator is putting on a voice obviously for like when Ophelia's speaking, but that voice is also the voice that is being given to the prose of this book. And it was this very like high-pitched, kind of like nervous, soft voice to the character, which I think is more tolerable the further on you get into this book, but especially at the beginning was really grating and annoying. And it's annoying because I don't think that the normal voice that this audiobook narrator has is fine. It's more of the voice that they use for like some of the other characters, and also like the chapter like numbers and things which are read out like in her normal voice. She also sometimes struggles to get into the voice that she does for Ophelia, which I don't think is a good thing to have in an audiobook, just to be nitpicky. And I think that is a good, I think that the voice is understandable for who Ophelia is as a character, because she is a character who does feel quite lacks confidence and is making herself small and trying to be agreeable and like lets other people dictate what she does in her life. So I don't think that it was a bad choice of voice. I just didn't like it, and that really affected my experience listening to this audiobook because I could not concentrate on it and I kept on losing my place. And by the end of this book, I was really bored with the story and what was going on in it. I could not care about these characters and about this relationship. And I feel like a lot of that reason was because of the audiobook narration, because I don't think there was anything objectively wrong with how the rest of the book was set up. And also, the other issue that I had with this book is, like I mentioned, the religion in this is very much based on like Catholicism and Christianity, which I think was interesting and done well. But we get a religious service near the end of this book, and it's at certain sections of it are word for word pieces of Christian mass that have just been plopped into this book. And it was such a this is so lazy. It really took me out of this book. I was really frustrated with it. Because you've made up this fantasy world, this fantasy religion, you're doing some really interesting things with this religion. You're taking an aspect of Christianity of the transmutation and eating of if you put it in a way of almost cannibalism of eating Jesus' flesh and blood, and you've made it into this more horror aspect to this world and this religion, and then you just go the Lord be with you and also with you, do better. It was so frustrating. I was already kind of tired with this book, and it really laughed me on the coffin, unfortunately. I have to admit that this is a similar Jacqueline Carey does a similar thing in Kushiel's Dart in the same way. So I don't think it's an absolute deal breaker for me. I still really enjoyed that book for everything else that was going on with it. But I do think it's an issue when you're doing a religion and you've made a bunch of stuff up about it and you do a service and then you just copy and paste word for word words from a different, from a real life religion, was kind of felt really lazy. And at a certain point things do change, but with and I don't even mind that it's still obvious that it's very much based on Christian mass. I think that would have been fine. It was the word for word, this is just words from Christian mass, that really frustrated me. So because of both of those things, I don't think that I can give this book more than 2 stars. I think it was just okay, and I felt it kind of let me down in some of those points. Because I was having a pretty good time up until I got so bored with it and that, word for word thing happened. The last book that I ended up reading was The Cautious Traveller Guide to the Wastelands by Sarah Brooks. This is the other physical book that I read this month. This is a historical fiction fantasy book set in a world where basically all of Siberia, kind of the space in between somewhere in Russia, I don't know the exact cutoff point, and somewhere in China, there's just this big wasteland where things are kind of weird in there, and the only way to get across it is with this train, this Trans-Siberian, kind of great Trans-Siberian Express train, and it ferries passengers kind of back and forth, but it's kind of a bit of a difficult journey, hence why there is, in this world, The Cautious Traveller Guide to the Wastelands book. So we're following characters on this train who's doing this, they're doing this journey from Beijing through to Moscow. It's the first journey that this train has been on for a little bit of time, because something really weird happened on the last journey that this train took. No one's really sure what happened there, but they've blamed the glass, and they blamed the glass maker for this. And the company is very much everything's fine, everything fixed, and everything is not fine and fixed, as you very much could imagine. So, yeah, we're following kind of, obviously, various travellers on this train with 3 main characters that we follow. One of them is Maria. She is a young girl. Her father was the glassmaker that was blamed for the previous issues with the train, so she's riding on the train to try and kind of work out what went wrong and kind of try and clear her dad's name. We follow Wei Wei, who is a young girl who has grown up on the train. She was born on the train and has kind of been on all of the journeys since her birth. And she's kind of facing the fact that things are different this time, and she's never had to deal with change when she was on the train, kind of thing, and kind of going on from there. As well as Henry Grey, who is like a disgraced naturalist who really wants to like investigate the Wastelands because he thinks that he will be able to find proof in there for his like Christian Science type ideals. It is that more historical, like intelligent design type time, so he's not like insane within the series, like the world, but he was pretty laughed out of like the naturalist society when he was bringing some of those ideas to the forefront there. We're just following these people on this train as it's traveling through the Wastelands, and what I would describe is what if annihilation is happening but on a train is kind of the plot of this book. It is much more based on these people's also like personal struggles and relationships and kind of little mysteries as well, but a lot of it is like, that's the type of like weirdness that I'm talking about in terms of the Wasteland, of a place that is trying to kind of mimic what it should be and also is changing in ways that are weird, slightly horrifying and things like that. I felt like this was really fun, this was really well done. My only like real issue is there are like parts in this book which are like based on days, and it doesn't feel like the right amount of time is passing within these chapters to compare to like the day markers, but I think that this was really well constructed. It was a really fun time. Again, this emotionally got to me. I felt like this was really well done and interesting, and I liked all the ideas that we were playing with. So yeah, overall I did give this one 4 stars as well. I think overall it was a pretty good month, apart from Holy Wrath. I think everything else I read I did quite enjoy. That's everything that I read in the month of March. In terms of like current reads, I've picked up Paladin's Grace as an audiobook, and I'm currently reading Ocean's Echo as well. I'm excited to talk to you about both of those books in my April wrap-up. So yeah, I hope that you've had some good reads. I hope that you've had a nice month. Bye!